We are live.
Hey y'all, I'm Dr. J. Bundy, and tonight we'll be discussing Armageddon with Doctors Michael Van de Graaf and Ben Davis. Are you ready? Welcome.
Jefferson laid great stress on it. It wasn't enough, he said, to enshrine some rights in a Constitution or a Bill of Rights. The people had to be educated, and they had to practice their skepticism and their education. Otherwise, we don't run the government. The government runs us.
Welcome to the sunny spot. So happy to be here. So happy to be sitting in this spot hosting for the lovely, wonderful Sunny Shell. I've got Dr. Michael Van de Graaf with me, aka Tapioca Weasel. All hail the Weasel. And Dr. Ben Davis. Ben, happy to meet you.
Good to be met. Good to meet you as well.
Yeah. So can y'all tell us real quickly who you are, and just also real quickly, what got you interested in Armageddon?
I can go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm Vandy, also known as Michael Van de Graaf. I'm a postdoc physicist at Stanford, and Armageddon is. We decided to do Armageddon for this show because there's so many different ways and things that you can talk about with that topic. I think it's great. I do have some opinions about Armageddon. I think that the only way humanity's going out is if we get hit by a giant space rock or something. Because I'm an optimist. So yeah. I'm very general interest in Armageddon.
All right, awesome. And Dr. Ben?
I'm Dr. Ben Davis. I teach at ECPI University. I have a PhD in nuclear physics. I couldn't get a job in physics when I got out of grad school, so I was a software developer for most of my career, controls engineer for a while, and now I'm a college professor. And one of the things I did before I went back to teaching, because teaching was always sort of my first best destiny, is I would go to these cons and do these panels and these presentations. And so I have a long list of presentations that I've done over the last 12 years, last dozen years or so. And one of them I did was Armageddon scenarios. When can we finally relax? This used to bug the crap out of me because this stuff scared the hell out of me when I was a kid. You know, somebody was telling me the world was ending pretty much every day for one reason or another, population explosion. So anyway, I have a whole presentation on it. If we get stuck, I got slides I can pull up and we can talk about. But I literally just did a presentation on this at RavenCon in Richmond. I don't know, 3 weeks back or something. So it's all fresh on my mind still.
Awesome. Appreciate that. For those that don't know, I'm an evolutionary biologist, also a postdoc, currently at the University of Minnesota. Go Gophers, and a former Christian. And so I remember I didn't grow up going to my grandparents' church, but they're Pentecostal, right? And you hear a lot about sort of the end times and stuff like this. And also it was a bit weird, right? Because it does sound big, dark, and scary, but there's a cheerfulness to the sort of sign of the times and all of this type of stuff. And it took a lot for me to get on the other side of that and be like, no, I think it's bad if the world ends. It's definitely bad if that happens. And that's about my level of expertise with this topic, but I'm super looking forward to this. So Dr. Ben, why don't you get us started, for the lay people here like myself, what is Armageddon technically?
Oh my goodness. See, now I didn't introduce myself as a former Christian, but I definitely am. And
too,
I was raised Southern Baptist in Memphis, Tennessee. And so, yeah, that's the thing about fundamentalist Christians and evangelicals. If we even try to make a difference between those two things, they're always looking for the friggin' world to end. They're always waiting for Jesus to come back. And it's all going to be better when that happens. So, yeah, unfortunately, there are a lot of people in this world that kind of want to see this happen.
Mhm.
And so it's almost like wishful thinking when you hear some of these things. One of the things I discussed in that panel I was telling you about was Late Great Planet Earth. I don't remember that author's name right now. Hal Lindsey, preacher, but he had all these scenarios predicting the end of the world. And so to answer your question specifically, Armageddon is a reference to Christ coming back, the battle between good and evil, and all of that. And so Christ is going to come down and drop the hammer on the devil, and it's all going to be better when that's finally done.
You said you've given presentations on this. Is Armageddon sort of the lingua franca? Is there like a technical way you guys talk about this? Doomsday scenarios? Is there a technical euphemism or something for these type of things?
Well, it's none of this stuff's highly structured, right? It's not academic.
Sure,
So
sure.
I don't know that there is any, right way to talk about it. Everybody you ask is going to have a different way of saying it or whatever. Usually Armageddon is, that's the biblical reference, right? So
Right.
usually that's what the religious people will say, but it's really end of the world scenarios is what we're talking about. As a matter of
Mhm.
fact, the slide says doomsday scenarios. It doesn't
Yeah.
say Armageddon,
Yeah.
but the title slide. But yeah, I say Armageddon in the South because everybody knows what I'm talking about.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. If I recall correctly, the specifically the word Armageddon refers to like a plains area, or something. It refers to a specific location, um,
Mm.
yeah, I
in
wasn't
Palestine,
gonna,
Israel, or something, but I'm not
yeah, I
sure.
wasn't gonna say it because I don't remember the exact pronunciation, but yeah, it's Megado or somewhere like that. It was a small town
Mm,
in the Holy Land that got wiped out, by the wrath of God, I think. I don't
yeah.
remember the lore behind that, but it's now to say that it's a real place. I mean, they actually have archaeological digs there and stuff like that. So it really was a town in Palestine that got wiped off the face of the earth because, some other race came through and didn't like Jews and decided they needed to live anymore. It seemed to
Wow.
happen a lot back in the Bronze Age.
So then it would have been a reference to some sort of like cultural memory or something like this.
Yep. And it was a reference to say that this is going to happen on an even bigger scale. It's going to happen worldwide, and it's going to be, again, the battle between good and evil universally, and not just in this one place where this battle took place.
Yeah, and I don't exactly understand why, people are so excited about it, because all of that just sounds scary. Even if you're on the winning side, war is not great, especially not a world-ending one.
The
Uh
funny thing about that is back when I worked at GE, uh, we used to, every Thursday night, ironically, we used to go out and go drinking at the local pub, drinking. We called it drinking night, right? And, $2 Crown and Cokes and all that. And I was sitting around the table with a bunch of engineers, what you think of as well educated people. And I think we were talking about, if I'm remembering the time right, I think we were talking about the Mayan calendar thing and how the world was going
mm,
to end over the Mayan calendar, coming to an end. And so one of the younger engineers, say late 20s, who had a couple of, had a new baby that was just born, was sitting there at the table. We're talking about this. We're talking about how it is, but he's like, and we're talking about how, Y2K, maybe something like that'll happen, and the world will end that way. And he says, am I wrong to say this? But I'm kind of looking forward to this. I'm like, dude, you cannot be that
Mm.
bored at 28 years old. You, you got two kids, you got a good job. What the hell do you mean you're kind of looking forward? Now,
Dating is
we're all
rough. It
looking
can't be that
right?
bad. Uh,
But I mean, I think that's something that secretly everybody wishes. Not everybody, that's too broad of a statement. But I think it's something that secretly a lot of people wish for, even if they're not religious. It's kind of like a change, a new thing, an adventure that's sort of foisted upon you so that you have to figure out how to evolve in a different way. and you don't have to go to your 9-to-5 job anymore.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of people that kind of sort of on some level, I mean, Scott was the only one that just ever came right out and said it. But, and then, like I say, he was half drunk when he said it. But I think there are a lot of people that sort of harbor this desire to see the world come to the end, and something else, to take its place.
I think it's really
Yeah.
interesting because I was kind of wondering about this, if you guys had thoughts as to, is this terrible idea that religion placed in my mind? It's really scary to me, actually. Like when I actually think about it, like the fact that that's even in there and people sort of are worshipful about that tradition and idea. But of course, like so many of the other things that there are religious ideation and ideas around, um, it helps if if it's already there, if it's already a common fear, if it's already a thing that we commonly mythologize about. And so I got to remember to not necessarily jump to the conclusion and blame religion for this fascination that
Well,
maybe
see,
we've always had.
I was about to do just the opposite, because you say you don't think you should blame religion, but I was about to point out that this is one of the insidious things about religion.
Yeah.
Okay.
It
I'm thinking specifically about Christianity because that's all I really know,
Sure.
but I think it's probably true, for like Islam and some of the more popular religions. It's this idea that we're all crap, and God looking down on us. He decided to take pity on us and create us, and then treat us like crap ever since.
Right.
And all the works. What's the quote I brought up the other night? All of your works look like filthy rags before the Lord. And it's like, I don't know what the hell kind of God wants to come along and make a race of people that he can just shit on for all eternity. But that is the mentality. And so it's like, Daddy's going to come and give us our spanking that we've been deserving for all these, millennia, since we've nailed him to a cross, kind of thing. And even before, Cain and Abel and all that. And so we deserve it and we just can't wait to get it. That seems to be kind of the message behind. Again, my wife's Methodist. She never deconverted like me. And
Okay.
there are certain sects that aren't that way. They take a little bit more of a moderate approach. But if you're talking about fundamentalist, and evangelicals, then they eat this shit up with a spoon. And I do not know what that is, why people love it so much, but I know it's a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it shows how far a person can push themselves and be pushed, to be, I think, consistent with their view. I try to think that some of it is just they have a lot at stake on these
I
beliefs.
I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance going on.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
definitely is. There always is that with religion.
And I hate to
Uh,
say it, but this is kind of an I told you so, right? Like, yeah.
it's a wished for kind of I told you so. It's like, yeah, I'm
Mm.
thinking about that. You guys, I know you guys have seen A Christmas Story, right?
The movie,
You know,
I don't
yeah,
remember it, but
There's
I've
multiple
sure
versions
seen
of
it.
it,
Yeah.
but you know the story.
no, the one where the kid's growing up in Indiana, and he wants the Red Ryder BB gun for Christmas. And there's a particular. You guys are giving me the. I can't.
No, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah.
this every Christmas. I
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
believe you guys don't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, there's a scene in there, right, where he says the F word and his mother's punishing him by making him washing his mouth out with Lifebuoy soap, right? And he's
Mm,
fantasizing about how he's going to go blind and punish his parents, because they made, and it's soap poisoning, right? Is why he went blind, and so he's literally having this fantasy. Do you guys remember what I'm talking
dark.
about now?
No, this
Randy's
I don't
laughing.
remember that part of it. No, I remember.
Oh God, gosh, you're killing me. You got to get out
Sorry.
more. Anyway, but yeah, it's that whole. I mean, it's very basic. I mean, what we need on this talk is a psychologist. We got what a biologist and 2 physicists, but what we
Yeah.
really need we need somebody that can explain the psychology of this.
I think
Ironically, my wife's a psychologist, but she doesn't do adults. She refuses to do adults. She's a school psychologist, but there's something about that satisfaction that you get, even if you're the one that gets hurt in the end. It's
Yeah.
the mental pain it causes your parents or whoever loves you. But it's that satisfaction of, I told you this was going to happen if you didn't, follow
Yeah.
the straight and narrow and take care of me the way I thought you should. And, and I'm actually having a laugh about it, even though I'm the one that, is suffering,
Yeah. Have
and
have you guys
that's a common thing.
seen Don't Look Up? It's
Yes.
it's
Yes.
a
No.
version of that that I think it very much explores exactly that idea, because there it's sort of the problem with society is the other problem, like everybody's ignoring the real problems. And the scientists who are trying to warn everybody are like, this is a big deal. And yeah, they definitely have that same sort of glee in watching everybody get proven wrong and you're proven right, even though you're all going to get vaporized in the end anyway.
Yes.
And some of that is political because it has to do with the COVID thing and wearing the mask and all of that.
Yes.
Which, I mean, you've even got smart people saying that was a mistake now.
I know. It drives me crazy.
I mean, I don't know if you ever watched Eric Weinstein. He does all these podcasts on,
Yeah.
and he's a smart guy. I mean, he does these 2-hour, 3-hour long podcasts. I'll sit there for 3 hours and watch him. And he actually says some really interesting things, but he'll start ripping on the whole COVID fiasco. And I'm just sitting there going, what fiasco, man? I had to wear a mask for a couple of months. I had to get a shot. Go ahead.
So one thing I was just going to say that kind of brings out to me there's a bit of a seriousness to this and almost sort of an urgency, because I always say there's that cliche, you should live in interesting times. And for me, when it comes to things like pandemics and war, it's like I would turn the interesting knob down a few notches. Like I'd be fine with, living in slightly less interesting times. But when I think about these things, COVID being one, the conflict and let's just say, leave it at that we're seeing in different places, it really does feel like there are people egging it on, and how are we supposed to work together right now in this moment? It's a bit difficult.
It's a big problem. It's actually why I originally thought of doing this talk when I was throwing out ideas for the talks to do. And going back to the religious analogy for a minute, I'll even confess right now is, I didn't believe in global warming. And why did I not believe in global warming? Why did I call bullshit on it when that first became, an item of concern for a lot of people? Is because my first exposure to global warming was Al Gore. And it's like, fuck, here's another politician drumming up some manufactured emergency to get everybody up in arms over. And I literally, I'd make the argument that, volcanoes go off all the time, dump carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I think it's kind of hubris to think that, man could generate that kind of pollution in the air to cause the kind of problems people are claiming. And that was a position I took. I went to cons and said this, as a panelist, and I went about 3 years, and it finally occurred to me that it's like, okay, I'm making what I think are logical arguments, but there are people that I know and respect that are on the other side of this, and maybe I should look at the data. And so, I finally sat down, and it only took me about a half a day. It only took me about 4 hours to go to the NASA website and look at the raw data myself and go, fuck, there really is a problem here. But I had that reflexive, oh, this is more of that same bullshit. And that's my point in even doing this talk, is that when you know, I want to say Chicken Little, but that's the boy who cries wolf, right? When the boy who cries wolf too often, you just think he's full of it when something real happens. And so that's the downside of all of these people saying the world's going to end on such and such a date and getting everybody up in arms. And then life goes on, the date comes and goes, and life goes on. And it makes us all calloused and less inclined to believe whatever we hear from anyone, but certainly for certain parties. I mean, I neither consider myself liberal or conservative. I'm sort of in the middle, kind of libertarian, if anything. But even that, people roll their eyes when you say that now.
Sure.
You know, I tend to be socially liberal and fiscally conservative, right? But the fact that it was Al Gore saying it was enough for me to just reflexively call bullshit on it. And you know, it took me about 3 years to finally look at the data and go, yeah, guys, there might actually be a problem here. You
But it
know,
took,
Yeah.
and
it sounds like it took 3 years and then 4 hours of actually looking at the data.
yeah, well, I mean, you know how it is. I mean, this
It
is the
is.
whole problem, right? You got friends that sort of agree with
Mhm.
you and tell you things that sort of bolster up what you already believe, and you got other friends that don't agree with you, and maybe they're not as good of friends, you know, because they're not as conservative as this group of friends over here, and you know, they tend to jump on every bandwagon, and so you tend to think they're a little more full of shit than the other group, and so you tend to discount what they say. And the point in me telling you all of this is, even with a PhD in nuclear physics and 160 IQ, you're susceptible to this, right?
Mm,
I mean, because it's a big world out there, there are a lot of issues, and nobody has time to go off and research every little thing they hear,
right.
right? So you've got to you've got to fit it into your worldview and use your internal logic as what you think is actually happening. Otherwise, you'd just be, you know, reading books all day long, and not even the good ones, you know. If it's physics books, that'd be different. But you know, books about climatology, it's like, no, I don't want to do that. You know, I've considered the source, and I don't trust the source, and therefore it must be wrong. But I mean, it's exactly the kind of crap the flat earthers do. It's exactly the kind of thing that the anti-vaxxers do. And we all look at them and go, okay, they're morons. Most of them are, but still, we're all susceptible to it under the right conditions.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I think it's very mainstream. It's not something people necessarily talk about a lot, but to me, a lot of people still identify with sort of mainstream Christianity, so to speak. And that is the narrative that they buy into or anticipate. You know, they may not think that it's a nice thing to talk about or polite dinner conversation with people who, you know, might not be believers or whatever, but they're very much about that being part of the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And there is there are enough of these people with those opinions in positions of power, such that if we actually did have um and we did have a maybe not an extinction level, but we had a huge threat that we're still dealing with it when it came to COVID. Um,
Uh-huh.
but if you know, if we actually do have an asteroid coming our way, or an enormous caldera erupting suddenly, you know, jumping climate change forward by centuries, the people who think that Armageddon is inevitable and it's all in God's plan are not going to be very effective in trying to prevent that from happening.
Oh
They're
yeah.
not going to be interested in that. And they're not going to think that it's worth investing in preventative measures or common sense, or in 100 years from now, because they don't think that there will be 100 years from now.
Oh, they'll be standing in hand singing Kumbaya when the freaking shockwave goes around the world 7 times and pummels them into dust. and they'll be thinking they're going to meet Jesus all the way down to that last minute when all the neurons in their brains disconnect. There are people that are just living for that day, and I grew up with them, and
I think
I
that's
don't
in a
know.
sense a
I'm not sure what I
tremendous
should say
irony.
next, just in case some of my family watches this. But yeah, I mean, that's what a lot of them are going to think to the bitter end, and they're going to welcome it. They're going to say, "This is great. Finally, what we've been predicting for 2,000 years has finally come to pass. See, we were right." It's like, kind of. You know, Meteors have hit the Earth before, and nobody blamed it on God, but whatever. You know.
Yeah, that's the irony of it, is that, like, accepting that you actually can become complicit in our actual downfall and destruction. So look, while we've got you here, do you want to take us through this presentation? Because it's chock full of information, I'm sure, that people would love to have.
Now, I am more than willing to do that. On principle, I wasn't going to do that because I figured the three of us could just talk.
Oh
But
yeah, we can. Well, do you want to just take us through some of the interesting
I
tidbits of the
already feel
history?
like I've been talking too much already, because it seems like I'm kind of dominating right now, and I don't mean to.
No,
But
no, no. I'll just be honest. I just thought, oh my goodness, there's so many of these like great movements in here, and like that I wasn't aware of. So do you want to just hit some of the highlights for folks?
I'll definitely show you some of my favorites. Let's see. Share screen, and then I have it on a virtual monitor, but let's see if we can make it work. I'll probably have to switch monitors so I can. No, I can leaf through it. So this one's a fun way to kick it off. And by the way, this talk, it doesn't say it in the title, but it is a lifetime of doomsday scenarios. This is all shit people have predicted
Mm.
that failed to come to pass in my lifetime alone. Right?
Oh, I
We
see.
can't
I
even
see.
try to go back, 100 years or 1,000 years or something, because the list is endless. But the Charles Manson thing is kind of fun. Manson predicted that Helter Skelter, an apocalyptic race war, would occur in 1969. And so he convinced a lot of people to do a lot of crazy shit based on that. Jim Jones, he's the one that, whacked all those people in, was it Guyana? I think it was Guyana in
Like
the end.
in
But this was
Jonestown.
1967. See, to me, this would be a failed minister, right? Because he made this prediction that the world was going to
Yeah.
end in 1967 to nuclear holocaust. 1967 came and went, but yet he still had this devoted group of followers that followed him to Guyana until he, made him drink Kool-Aid and die. This
Yeah.
always scared me. Population explosion. This story went on and on for what feels like a good 10 years of my life, but this would have been when I was about, early teens. So probably wasn't quite that long, but it was around 1975 when this was a big thing.
This is one I
And
hadn't heard of. I hadn't heard of this before.
oh my goodness. See, now you're telling me how young you are when you say that.
Well, I
'Cause this was a
appreciate it. I'm
big
not
deal.
gonna resist that. Go ahead.
Yeah, this was a big deal.
This is the
It's
one
like,
where GMOs kind of were some of the things that were very specifically, obviously not anticipated, I believe. Because they did some math about crop yield, basically,
yeah.
and it used what turned out to be obsolete um, projections on how much food you could actually make in a given area.
Oh, and was this literally the idea that we were just going to overpopulate the planet, and that was just going to be it?
Yeah,
So there's actually several examples of this that I can bring up. People look at an exponential curve, and my running joke on this is everything looks like an exponential curve until it doesn't look like an exponential curve anymore.
I was literally
So
gonna say this sounds like exponential thinking gone wrong.
yeah,
that's exactly what this is. That's this guy, Paul Ehrlich, Professor Paul Ehrlich. And of course they're writing books, and these are bestsellers, right? They're making millions of dollars writing these books to predict this stuff. But he's looking at the exponential growth of the population, and he's saying that by the time the year 2000 hits, people are going to be stacked up like cordwood. There's not going to be enough surface area on the planet to accommodate the number of people. Well, the problem with exponential growth is it only happens until you hit some limit, right?
Yeah.
That stops it from happening anymore. There was another one that I distinctly remember because I was kind of getting into investing at that point in time. I was coming out of grad school, and I was trying to think, okay, I've got to, start 10 years later than anybody else in my career path of my age. And it's like, I got to start doing some investing. So there's this book called Bankruptcy 1999. And again, it used this exponential curve argument that the government was borrowing money at an exponential rate, and eventually there just wasn't going to be enough money in the world anymore, and the whole government was going to go bankrupt and everything was going to collapse in 1999. Well, that didn't happen either, right?
That feels in like 8 different ways.
Right.
Money is one of those things that you can kind of make out of nothing to some. It has consequences, don't get me wrong, but it's not like you don't have conservation of money. That's not like a law.
Well, and it's funny because it's like we didn't even come close to what you could get away with, apparently. Because going back to COVID, I mean, we essentially printed money, right? Or the subprime debacle. What was that?
Oh.
08?
Yeah.
We literally printed, basically printed trillions of dollars and just put it in the money stream, and the market just absorbed it. It's not like anybody went bankrupt.
Ember in the chat said something about what, Jehovah's Witnesses in 1975.
I was going to ask about that because they had it was a popular saying, "Stay alive till 75." The Jehovah's Witnesses really were pushing the idea that the second coming or the third coming or whatever, because they also think something happened in 1914, was going to happen in 75, and now they are they have really done their best to scrape that from all of their history. Basically, they've retconned it.
Wow.
Do you have a slide for that, or is that sort of lumped into? Okay. Yeah.
No, I mean I have other slides because again, I mean this is a rich environment you can mine, right?
Yeah.
I mean you could make hundreds of slides. I actually had to blow through these slides at warp speed just to show them to everybody in 50 minutes the other night. Just based on the ones I picked. The other thing that I brought up that just sort of popped into my head as I was talking, which I mean, this maybe isn't the most appropriate time to bring it up, but we're doing highlights, right? So why not? There was a documentary on HBO back when cable was still new.
Are you
The Man
talking
Who
about
Saw Tomorrow.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about Armageddon with Bruce Willis.
Oh no. That's a movie. I mean, that's fiction, right?
Terrible.
I'll cut people slack when we're talking about fiction. But no. The name of the documentary was The Man Who Saw Tomorrow. It was narrated by Orson Welles. Do we remember, children? Do we remember what Orson Welles is famous for?
He wrote 1984, right?
No, he was a radio announcer.
Maybe.
And he did a radio cast of War of the Worlds.
Oh, that's okay.
And he sent, I think it was all of New Jersey and some of New York into a panic because that's where he was broadcasting. Because it was so realistic, and he didn't do the disclaimer every time they came back from commercial or whatever. And so people really believed that the Martians were invading the Earth and killing off the military and anybody that got in their way. So that's what he was famous for. But then he became I guess what he's secondly famous for is he did Citizen Kane. He was the main actor in Citizen Kane, which of course is considered to be a classic, I think, even today. So he's an actor, and he's a good actor. And he's got this really deep stentorian voice, and everything he sounds. He's like Morgan Freeman, right? He's like the white 1970s Morgan Freeman. And
Could be
so
the voice of
everything
God.
yeah, everything he says has this gravitas, just because it's that voice,
Yeah.
just like Morgan Freeman. And so he did this documentary about Nostradamus. Nostradamus. But it's like they had interpreted all of Nostradamus's writings, and they had decided that, we were all going to die in nuclear conflagration based on, this seer's vision from 2,000 years ago, and how he's been dead right about everything he's ever said. I bring it up because, again, that particular documentary came out when I was maybe 16, 17 years old, and it scared the fuck out of me. It's like, and again, it's that mystical thinking, right? It's that the fact that somebody could actually be psychic and predict the future, because their vision was just that good or whatever. And of course, as I've gotten older, I've gone on ghost hunts, and I'm kind of famously skeptical even in the con circuits, but
Wouldn't that time
because
frame also match like fears about nuclear fallout? It's sort of interesting how
yeah,
that
really fed
context
into
then
the whole Cold
matches
War thing.
the yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, all that's coming back now too, I think.
So the other when
Not
it
without
popped into
reason.
my head the other night when I was giving the talk, one of the things I pointed out is I went looking for that documentary because I wanted to watch it again. I wanted to watch it with a view to debunking it and trying to look at it with a little more logical mind. Look at it with a 60-year-old brain instead of a 16-year-old brain, and see if it was really as scary as I thought it was at the time, or if I would just laugh at it now. But you can't find that documentary anywhere. Not Vimeo, not YouTube. HBO has the rights to it, and they made sure that every copy of it got pulled because the predictions were so fucking wrong. And they didn't want to have to deal with the fact that they could miss that much. So, they got their money's worth out of it, back before 1999 or whenever the war was supposed to happen. But then they pulled it from the shelves, and you can't even stream the video of it now.
What was the premise like? Was it literally like there was a psychic who was like, I'm seeing all this and it's going to happen? Like they were literally prophesying? Or was there so what was like the chain of events? Like, because eventually it becomes falsifiable. Eventually you can start to be like, okay, this didn't match.
Yeah. That's exactly my point. The premise of it was that Nostradamus was this, psychic from 2,000 years, 1,500 years ago, that had this special ability, and he had to encode his, writings, because if he just made his prediction straight away, then the Catholic Church would have burned him at the stake, kind of thing. So he had to write everything in code, but they'd broken the code, and they knew what, they knew all these other predictions came true, and this is what's going to happen next based on Nostradamus's predictions. And if you're not in a mindset to think critically when you're watching that, it was very convincing.
Interesting.
And like I say, I would love for somebody to dig out an old copy of that, even on VHS, if they could, copy it over to, some sort of streaming format and send it to me. That would be great. Because I would love.
I was gonna say that it reminds me the mentality there reminds me a lot of QAnon. Because the QAnon people, like, you've got this random person Q whose identity probably changed over the years. And he he gave down his completely vague, nonsensical writings that you would then like cook into something and jam it into the stories about an evil cabal of adrenochrome eating Satanists. And
the other thing that works really well and it worked really well for Nostradamus. Is
Yeah.
he was, I don't know if he did it on purpose or accidentally. I'm thinking that it probably just sort of came naturally for him, but he had the biblical references in there, right?
Mm.
He would talk about the beast, would come out of the east, and then some good guy from the west, because fortunately the Americans get to be the good guys in the scenario. Go figure. But he talk about the beast and how he would, come out of this certain area of the world, and he would probably be Muslim and that kind of thing. And then there'd be this big conflagration, this big war, and there'd be 1,000 years of peace. That's all straight out of Revelations.
Yeah.
So he actually was singing the song that the Christians wanted to hear, with these predictions. So that just added fuel to the fire, right?
Mhm.
That was a catalyst for it.
Yeah.
And it's part of what made him so popular. But now that he's been proven to be dead wrong, because we're all supposed to be long dead, and our progeny is supposed to be living in the millennium of peace now, at this point, according to these predictions. But once it's all proven that it didn't work out that way, it's like, oh well, just kidding, sorry. And then you can't even find the friggin' video so that you can go back and
Yeah.
watch it. None of it.
Well, I just wait another 10 years, because somebody is going to make basically the same prediction a few years down the line on exactly the same source material. Somebody is people still are doing this with Nostradamus. They're still doing it with Q. They
over and over again.
It's revelation. I mean, the half of in this presentation, because I also have it was shared in the private chat earlier. Like most of these are, not all of them. The one from Professor Ehrlich was not religiously motivated. Maybe, probably, who knows, actually. But most of these are from people reading Revelation and then writing fan fiction about it, like Left Behind.
Yep.
Like Left.
Yep.
People. And
that's a good way to put it. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's mythology, right? So it's buying into the mythology, and it's using those mythological allegories, I guess is the word I'm looking for here, like a touchstone to making your predictions, and then it resonates with everybody, because it fits right in with your religious beliefs anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to?
These sort of match the touchstones.
Do you want to just? You had a list where you had one where you had like a quick list of them. Let's maybe pull that up and
go back to the very beginning. That's I actually made like a. This was when I first started doing Google Slides, and so I was getting cute. I made like a little table of contents with hyperlinks on everything. But that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, so just you can see like a lot of them. Now, one I remember is Y2K. Actually, I was thinking about that earlier when you mentioned when we were talking about 1999.
Y2K is the favorite rant.
And Heaven's Gate. I remember Heaven's Gate well. I think there's somebody they left behind in Heaven's Gate that is still
maintaining the website.
Yeah, maintaining the website and still buying into the whole thing. But to his point, it's Jim Jones, Charles Manson, probably that new Ice Age. I don't know about that. Hal Lindsey, Pat Robertson, Heaven's Gate,
Jerry Falwell.
Yep.
I don't know if
yeah.
Well, he's on there twice.
He's on there at least he's at least twice. Yeah.
I think I have a blurb in there about how when he failed his first prediction, he came up with the second prediction, and he was still wrong the second time.
This other one I can't read, but it's a church ministry in 2008.
Yeah.
God's church ministry.
God's church ministry.
I'm not
aren't they all? I should have just known that. God's church. Of course, it's God's church ministry. That's not generic at all.
And what's funny is if you look at the last one, Jean Dixon, the psychic, you may not remember. She was big on, you call on the phone, you call the 1-900 number, and she charges you $2 a minute or whatever to talk to her psychic friends. I wrote that talk about 4 years ago, for a con, and I deliberately didn't update it because Gene Dixon had a prediction that the world was going to end in 2020, which
Yeah.
that was going to be my big shocker at the end of that talk when I wrote it 4 years ago. And it's like, yep, that one came and went too. So I left it in there to say, this is the next one you got to worry about. Sure enough, that one came and went just like every other one came before.
Yeah.
Nothing happened.
I
So
remember there was a big
Okay.
one where a guy got like it was in the States. I think maybe it was in around 2012, but the guy who convinced a bunch of people that the rapture was going to happen, I'd recognize the name, and like multiple families like sold their homes and everything. I'm not sure why.
Man, I was a programmer in 1999, and I knew software developers that, quit their jobs and went to live in a bunker out in the middle of the woods somewhere, stocked up a bunch of supplies and stuff
for Y2K.
And yeah, just disappeared for Y2K. And my story about Y2K is I absolutely refuse to do any of the updates on my Windows 95 machine because I just felt like we had what we jokingly called the Come to Jesus meeting every Monday morning at the job I was working at the time. And one of the division heads usually would get up there and do a talk. And so one of the division heads had read a book about the coming Y2K disaster, right? And so he gave up and he gave an hour talk about this book he read. And he was trying to tell me that my car wouldn't start because all of these microprocessors and all of these, computer-driven things in the car, and they've all got internal clocks, and it was all written originally in COBOL. And so when it rolled over from 99 to 00, even your car's going to get GPS satellites are going to fall out of the sky. And I'm sitting there going, dude, I know how Isaac Newton works. I mean, they might go dead, they might stop working, but they're not going to fall out of the goddamn sky. But the other thing is,
how many electronics do you know that have the wrong date and stuff on them and have a different date every time you turn the thing on? Like a lot of stuff, it just doesn't matter.
Yeah, so I was young. I would have been teenager, but I remember actually being a bit disappointed. Like I didn't think the world was gonna end, but I was actually hoping at least a couple of things acted squirrely.
Yeah, something didn't happen.
Yeah, and I remember just like it was such a nothing burger, like just nothing.
It was.
Well, and again, I can't believe this guy was saying this because I think at the time I was driving a '96 Buick, and I'm sitting there in the audience listening to this guy and going, "How the fuck does my Buick know what year it is? I've never told it." It's like my 96 Buick didn't have any idea whether it was 97, 98, 99. Why is it all of a sudden going to stop working, at January 1st, 2000? And of course it didn't. It started right up, the next morning, just like everything else, and the thing that killed me then, because I literally stayed up with my unupdated computer through the night, watched the big millennial celebrations, go through Australia, Christmas Island, Australia, India, all of Europe, and it's like, yep, nothing ever happened. I got on this tangent and I forgot what I was going to say. Getting old sucks, but it's like nothing ever happened.
Basically, from my understanding, is basically about as much bad happened from Y2K as happens when they add an extra second to like sync up astronomical time and the UTC time, like because you get some glitches and stuff and like a couple websites like go down or something, but the planes are not falling out of the sky.
I remember what I was going to say now. Commentators, as I was watching all these millennial celebrations, go around the world, the commentators were saying, and this just shows how well prepared we were because somebody warned us in advance. And it's like, no, that's not what happened, dude. I'm sitting here on the internet with my Windows 95 machine that I didn't do any updates on, and it's fine. I mean, all that money we spent getting ready for Y2K, maybe some good came of it.
Yeah,
But
I think there probably was some things that would have broken, but I I don't think there were that many, and I think that
well,
they were fixed. But like, what would have
it was
happened
a
if nobody had literally done anything? It's not clear to me. I don't think it's clear even in retrospect.
if you'd written some shitty software and you were trying to push out
Yeah,
some upgrades to it without admitting that the original software you wrote was shitty, then it was a boon for you. It's like you got to put the patches in that and blame it on
yeah.
Y2K, and not that you wrote shitty software in the beginning. So I'm sure somebody was breathing a sigh of relief over that. And I'm sure a lot of people used it as an opportunity
Mhm.
to fix some things that they were going to have to fix regardless, and maybe even get some government subsidies while they did it.
And I mean, that's
So
kind of crazy too, right? Because you have this thing that ended up being again a big nothing burger. But at the time, it felt like you could just go, you go around and go, well, we got to make it Y2K compliant. Oh, okay. Well, here's a bunch of money to go fix it.
Yeah. It,
I had my
it,
man. I was out in the backyard, man. I wanted to see some of those GPS satellites just fall out of the sky for no reason.
how many
I
are
wanted
there
to see
even?
them. I wanted to see them defy orbital mechanics just because Y2K.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
when their code stops working, suddenly conservation of momentum just doesn't apply anymore. It's because we
Exactly.
forgot to update the BIOS of reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been a neat trick. I would have liked to have seen that.
It would have been more convincing if it was like at least adding another digit or something. Like, tell me the thing's gonna break because it's not ready to go from 9,999 to 10,000 or something, but just from 1,999 to 2,000, that seems like it can handle that.
Well, see, that was a COBOL thing, right? Nobody even remembers COBOL anymore. I had to learn COBOL when I was a freshman in college, and
Okay.
that was the shittiest language. I fucking hated it. And it's like already old and outdated, and nobody used it even in 1983. So, yeah, when another 17 years went by and I'd gone to grad school, gotten a job as a programmer and everything else, and somebody said the world was going to end because of old COBOL code, it's like, well, COBOL's a shitty compiler, so I can believe it, but I don't believe any of that stuff's actually in there anymore. It
Right.
wasn't. It's like nobody writes in COBOL anymore. Jesus fucking Christ, man! They gave up on that shit in the 70s. You know,
Yeah.
So one thing that
I mean,
struck me is some of these examples are some of like the most prevalent examples that we have of cults,
Yeah.
and cults that ended up doing very extreme things, right? Mass suicide or
Murder.
murder and all this type of stuff. And I had
Jonestown
not
was not a mass suicide. It was a mass murder.
yeah, I had not thought about that, right? I had not thought
Yeah.
about the connection between sort of doomsday scenarios and extreme power over people.
oh yeah, and it's
Yeah.
the whole it's that faith thing where you have to prove your faith, and how else can you prove your faith but by jumping off a cliff? Either literally
Right.
or virtually in some way. Uh, and it is amazing, even under normal circumstances, what some people will do and be willing to even give up their lives to make the point that they have faith. And of
Yeah.
course, that's I like science a lot better. I like, I like having a rational discussion and say, show me proof, and you know,
Yeah. Show me
I
the
Yeah.
still
mechanism.
probably won't
Show
kill
me.
myself regardless of what you tell me, but
Yeah.
Yeah. I also
Like,
wonder how much of that is like embedded in, again, just even more mainstream thinking. So one of the things I always talked about being Christianity's superpower is something I call soft culting. It's the idea that when we think about what a cult is, we think of a lot of these extreme examples. They make you go live somewhere and change your name and
yeah.
drink the Kool-Aid, and Christianity doesn't really seem to impose those restrictions on you. And so for a lot of people, like, you can't be a cult because I'm not having to do that, right? And so then you can be asked to do a lot of other things. And when I think about it, it's like there's certainly a lot of false prophecy and things that clearly didn't come true, in the faith tradition, even going through the Old Testament. But
Uh-huh.
even like with Jesus, I think about the fact that he said things like, some of you here will not taste death or whatever before the
Yeah.
end or whatever. And if we think about like a lot of this faith didn't spread till whatever, however you slice it, decades later, it's like that had to have already basically been proven wrong before they even got started.
Yeah.
So like baked in is some kind of
Oh,
juju
yeah.
or something, right? Like, because you would think
Well, when
otherwise
you,
they'd exclude that or keep that part out or don't mention that.
Yeah.
yeah,
I
I mean,
Catholic.
it's like when Copernicus came along or Galileo, and uh, they love rationalization was the word we used back in the 70s. You don't hear it so much anymore, but it's a good word. You know, Galileo came along and proved that, the moon wasn't a perfect heavenly sphere. It had imperfections on it. It had mountains and hills and craters and discoloration in different spots. Like you couldn't see that with the naked eye, right? You could see craters on the moon with the naked eye, and Copernicus comes along and basically shows the observations and the math that the Earth is not at the center of the universe. If anything, it's the sun. And people shit over that for a few years, right? And then the Catholic Church said, "Oh, well, yeah, we kind of knew that all along. It's just God humbling us. I mean, it was our interpretation, not what was actually written in the Bible. It was our bad. It's fine." And so no matter what you show them or what they tell them, these people that believe this are going to rationalize away whatever
Yeah.
scientific explanation you
Right.
give them anyway. So it's like, let them do what they want, and then they can rationalize the actual facts as they need to, um, as long as they don't kill anybody else. And that's been the rub of it is they very often end up trying to kill somebody else over this stuff.
Exactly. We have two questions from Wes. So, um, first, can solar flares make electronics not work, and could that mess anything up?
Am I taking this or are you taking this, Vandy?
We'll both take it. So
Okay.
so if you have enough bad space weather, strong enough solar flares, coronal mass ejections, if the sun sends enough charged particles our way, yes, it can screw things up. This There was a rather famous event in the early days of like telegraph called the Carrington event when there was like strong enough solar activity that they were actually operating telegraph lines with the power supply disconnected. And because they were getting
Wow.
enough
Induced
like
current on
EMF,
the
enough
grid.
current,
Yeah.
and because basically there's a giant electric field just shoving electrons all over the place. So it is a thing that a is a risk, yeah.
Is a possibility.
All
Yeah.
right.
Sometimes I think we venture into even the uh, spectacular, side of that. I mean, yeah, it could happen under the most extreme conditions, but it's like we just had this CME, right?
Yeah.
So
Coronal
that was
mass
the
ejection
It's that sort of
that
thing. If that was 100 times or 1,000 times worse, um, it would be 100 times or 1,000. If you just dial it up enough, eventually it's going to cause a problem.
if you
The
dial it up enough. Yes.
the thing about our sun is that our sun is a very quiet, stable, um, friendly sun to be around. It doesn't have a whole lot of that sort of thing going on, which stars of that size and type generally behave that way.
Yep.
Like red dwarfs, if you're orbiting a red dwarf and you're in its habitable zone, necessarily you have to be much closer to it in order to still be in the habitable zone. And red dwarfs also tend to have more activity, is my understanding. And so it's unclear if the habitable zones there are as hospitable for life, because they might just get irradiated by solar wind and coronal mass ejections and stuff.
All right. So the
Yeah.
follow-up is electromagnetic weapons too. Is that a problem for us to EM another country and mess them up?
Well, that's you.
That's a real problem. That now, if you start, it's one thing when you talk about a CME from 93 million miles away. We just had one. We saw the northern lights actually become visible all the way down here to South Carolina. I didn't get to see
Yeah, it
them,
was
but
cool. I
others
saw a
did.
lot of people taking photos. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
agree.
it's like I've never seen enough activity to even dream about seeing the northern lights in South Carolina. I mean, so that's as bad as it's ever gotten in my lifetime, and still nobody said the first thing about the electronics going bad. Now,
Yeah.
that said, if you set off a nuclear bomb in the ionosphere and you start sending high-speed electrons down to the earth and inducing this large electromagnetic pulse on the grid, then that could fry a lot of shit. Like suddenly, if your outlets jump to 20,000 volts from this induced EMF, yeah, that's probably not going to be good for your smart TV, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's not like it's going to turn it off. Like that would fry it. Like it would not be repairable because literally the very small electronics.
Oh,
gets
it's not
screwed more by these
blackout.
things.
It cooks everything.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Now the blackout's going to happen too, right? The breakers are going to trip, and
That too.
there's going to be a massive blackout, just like what happened in the northeast
Yeah.
back in the late '60s. But will it be as bad as some people predict? I'm not sure about that, but yeah, there will definitely be a lot of electronic casualties. That the stuff that was unplugged. I mean, when they restore the power, that stuff's still going to work when you plug it back in, right? So it's not going to be a
Yeah.
total loss, but it's going to be sheer chaos for probably the first 48 hours at least,
Wow.
while they bring the grid back up and get stuff working again.
It's the sort of thing that you need to make sure that the infrastructure is prepared for some of, like, hospitals don't have 24 hours to worry about turning things back on or replacing components. Like you
Yeah.
want to have some protections against these things. Also, because if you suddenly just have a grid failure in a mechanism that hasn't happened yet, but if you suddenly disconnect a chunk of the grid, you'll get, like, suddenly power is going places or trying to go places where it wasn't going before, and you can get localized sort of huge surges maybe that that can cook things kind of anyway.
This is one of those things we take for granted. And
Yeah.
if you're not in the industry, you don't even realize it. But there's tens of thousands of people that do what's called load balancing on the
Yes,
grid.
exactly.
They literally just sit there at power plants and spin the turbines at the same synchronous speed with all of the other things on the grid. And when the grid takes on more and more load, all of the generators start to slow down, and so they bring other plants online to bring that speed back up. And they're usually watching it on the level of like a tenth of a hertz or something, or even a hundredth of a hertz in frequency. So when it drops below 60 hertz to 59.9 hertz, people are making phone calls, right, and bringing
Yeah.
in all of these extra power plants, bringing them online as fast as they can to make sure that they bring that load back up to what they're expecting it to be.
Wow. No, I never think about the people maintaining the grid, and that's a
It's
lot of work.
it's incredibly important, and grid safety is something that I don't think maybe we're a lot better at it than I think. I think so far we've gotten lucky in that we haven't had anything really catastrophic. Um,
You know how it is.
did,
You know,
didn't
you got
Texas
all
have
these
some issues
engineers.
with wind or something that like they had a huge power outage?
You cut out at a
Uh,
critical time there. Do we have some issues with what?
oh, I think we've gotten lucky in that we haven't had any critical grid issues on like a huge scale that have
Yeah,
lasted weeks on end.
we have seen it. You know, the whole thing in Texas when they had
Yeah,
the
that's what the
big
thing's asking
snowstorm in
about. Yeah.
Texas.
Yeah.
And one of my friends that goes to all the same cons I do actually did a talk on that. He was a nuclear engineer. He's retired now, but he took an interest in that and the whole Texas thing. Um, and it's a fascinating story. Texas is one of those places that sort of wants to be their own country, even though they're not. And so there were only two places in the grid that fed from the rest of the country into Texas. And so when they suddenly had all of these power demands come on because of this ice storm, they simply could not feed
Yeah.
enough power into Texas to keep the grid up. And so it all went down. Now, the other thing that's scary about this, I actually teach this when I teach physics, is when I was at GE. Well, okay, so the first thing you got to know is a motor and a generator are essentially the same thing. You can take a magnet and some coils, and you can cause the shaft to spin either by running current through it, or you can put torque on the other end of it and spin the magnet, and you can cause current to come out. And it's essentially the same thing. And I spent many years of my life thinking that that was just a trick, you know, like with my toy cars when I was a kid. And then I started working for the power systems at GE, and I realized that when we made this 100 megawatt turbine and we sold it to somebody, it was attached, of course, to a generator, and they literally wired it up backwards when they installed it in the plant. And so it was pulling power off the grid until this generator acted like a motor and spun this turbine up to speed. And then when this turbine was spinning fast enough, they started injecting the fuel and they started actually running it like a power source. And then they flipped the leads on it, and suddenly it was delivering power to the grid. The reason that is a story worth telling is that if the whole grid goes down,
You can't
You
start it
can't
up
do
again.
that. Yeah.
You have
can't
to
do that.
manually turn it.
You don't have any way. What are you going to get? A team of horses now to turn this 100 megawatt turbine fast enough
Yeah.
to get power
You
coming out of it so you can spin up the next one down the line? So if you were to actually lose the entire grid, which is kind of what happened in Texas. Now they still could go externally to get what they needed, you know, from outside of Texas. But
yeah.
if this whole grid goes down, you got a real problem because you can't just spin these turbines up. At least not the. There's a good answer to this. You can't spin up the natural gas turbines. You can spin up the steam driven turbines, and you can get them working because you can spin the turbines with the boiler and the steam. So you can run a coal fired plant and get the boiler going and get that turbine spinning. And once you get some voltage on the line, then you can spin up these other like natural gas driven turbines and stuff. But it would take days. If you lost the entire grid, it would take days of tens of thousands of people running around like chickens with their heads cut off to try to
Wow.
get this thing back up and running and supply the 110 volts you're supposed to have at your outlet.
All the while, all the cell phone towers have stopped working, so you can't call anybody to coordinate any of this stuff. And
Right.
eventually, your cell phone's going to run out of battery, even if there is a cell phone working. So you don't. All of the things that you would use to logistically handle it require the system to be working on some level. It
Yeah, it
would.
would
It
be a
would.
bloody mess. I mean, you know, you probably wouldn't have internet either.
Yeah, Dr. Ben, why can't the natural gas ones do more like I thought basically it was just kind of the same thing, except instead of coal burning, it was natural gas burning.
It's like the jet engine on a plane. You've got these blades, right, that are tilted, and if they spin a certain way, they'll blow the air a certain way and compress it, and you can inject fuel and you can set
Oh,
fire to it. But it
I
doesn't
didn't
have a
realize they worked
preferred,
like jet engines. Okay.
yeah, it
Wow.
doesn't have a preferred direction to turn in the beginning, right? If you
Yeah.
just start injecting fuel into it and setting it on fire, it's going to blow flames out both sides of the thing, in equal amounts,
Mm.
pretty much, you know.
So I think it's a good point to ask this question because you're describing a lot of science, a lot of engineering, and I think of that mostly as a lot of motivation. Like you gotta go to a lot of school, you gotta study hard, you gotta be about that life. And I think maybe you brought this up, but is there a way that we use Armageddon as motivation? Like when I was still a believer, um, I believed God worked through natural means.
Mhm.
And because of that, telling me that God did something didn't stop me from asking how. And because
You
of
went through
that,
a lot of the same rationalizations I did
yeah. And so
with
I
certain
and
things
so in
in
a
life.
way I credit my faith, believe it or not, with giving me an interest in nature and caring sort of about those because I like to think if I wasn't religious, maybe I just didn't care about nature and how all of it worked. But I did, and then that led me to science. Is there a similar way that someone's fascination with doomsday scenarios turns into a good engineer?
I
Is there a
think so.
pipeline we could create
Yeah,
there?
I think so. As a matter of fact, a lot of my friends on the Ask Dr. Ben page, and other places, because most of my subscribers are atheists. They'll occasionally make comments that effectively boil down to he's a Christian, he can't be a good scientist. I
Mm,
I think that's a horrible thing to say.
Very
My
funny.
mentor at Notre Dame, was a devout Catholic. He was and for that matter, anybody that lived 100 years before today, I mean, they were going to be steeped in a culture that taught them to be religious and to think in religious terms. And so they would definitely do this thing where they would go, I can still understand the beauty of nature and know that God's behind it, but I can still understand how and why it works. And I mean, we've literally had millennium of people that thought that way and brought science to the point that it's at.
right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
even though they were religious, and
Yeah.
so the two aren't mutually exclusive, and it's a mistake to think that they are. There's a lot of good scientists that are Christians. There are a lot of good people that I work with even today. As you might imagine, I don't discuss it with them openly, but
Sure.
I believe
Sure.
they're Christian, and yet they're still good scientists and engineers. So even if you take it to that extreme, where you're thinking about Armageddon and how you're going to survive Armageddon, yeah, there are a lot of survivalists, like some of these guys that I knew that were programmers in 1999 that suddenly just quit their jobs and disappeared. They were good technicians, and they went out in the desert and they built Faraday cages and they built these generators that would automatically kick on back when you
Wow.
couldn't just buy that off the shelf.
Mm.
So they had to build the circuitry to do that, detect the loss of power and kick in their backup generator for their house, and build wind turbines when wind turbines weren't a thing, for whatever plot of land they were living on. So there's actually a whole lot of people that are in this sort of uh, class of folks that we're talking about that are actually very good technicians, if not very good scientists. And I imagine a few of them are probably even very good scientists. If you really started to look around. So yes, and it can motivate them to learn how things work so that they can survive when everything else goes south in society. Um, yeah, I think there are people that are just like what you describe and are probably very good at it. I don't know any of them personally at this point in my
Sure.
life, but
I was also just
I-
thinking like motivation to answer big questions or to think about, you know, the things that really because it struck me that you proposed some of the, or maybe we should talk about those, some of the real scenarios that actually, you know, we think of as sort of being maybe extinction level events or doomsday scenarios. So yeah, you want to talk about those a little bit?
I
Sure.
was
You got any thoughts over there, Tapioca Weasel?
Yeah, well, I was gonna say what your question sort of about the motivation originally brought up to me was like in 1996, I think it was 1996, two movies were released in the same year with the exact same premise, Deep Impact and Armageddon.
Yeah.
And I think probably a lot of kids like got really excited and wanted to go into maybe like rocket engineering or something, and that it really I mean I'm not a rocket engineer, and I was a little young to watch them when they came out, but I watched them a few years later, and those are great movies, and they're really exciting, and like watching people like come together to like overcome the problem, I thought was awesome. I also think that it becomes once you're actually talking about a specific um a specific problem, it becomes more manageable. And you can, because if you have an asteroid coming and you got to stop the asteroid, that is a very straightforward physics problem with a whole lot of complicated intermediate physics problems that you have to solve in order to
Right.
like do the thing, which is you need some momentum transfer.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I mean, you bring enough motivated people into
Yeah.
focus, they can solve just about any problem. I mean, that's what the space race was. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the Cold War led to the space race, and we had to beat those damn Russians, you know, the Soviets, to the moon. And so there were a lot of people that weren't necessarily thinking about, you know, building rockets and going 250,000 miles, you know, with the thing and soft landing a module on the moon with people in it. But
And then coming back.
suddenly somebody
What?
said it was important and somebody started writing the checks for the research, and suddenly there was an army of people interested in doing it. And yeah, they figured out how to do it. So yeah, first of all, if you have enough resources, you can solve just about any problem you want.
Yeah.
I think what you were asking me though is the survivalism aspect. I used to tease Annie, still do from time to time, about buying an old missile silo and moving out in the desert. You know, at this point in my life, I'm too old for that shit. It's like if Armageddon comes, I'll just fucking starve, man. I don't want to. I don't want to sit on a mound of dirt with my AK-47, you know, fighting off, you know, the people that are trying to, you know, steal my last sardine can full of food. Fuck that. No, I just lay down and die if that happens at this point in my life. But when I was younger, I mean, again, it's that adventure aspect of it, right? And the
Right.
fact that
Right.
I'm going to go off here, you know, it's what made people settle the West, even, right? Pioneering kind of thing, where I'm going to go off over here on my own plot of land, and I'm going to be completely self-sufficient, and it's going to be so cool and fun to figure out how to do all of this stuff by myself. Um, and yes, you can do that, and yes, I think there are plenty of people that do that. I'm not one of them anymore. I like my creature comforts.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Me too.
I mean, as much as I love my little dog, she's run off now, the puppy. She chewed when I first got fiber. She chewed through the fiber cable one Friday night and took out my internet.
Oh,
And
no.
I held it together the first time, but that's literally the only time in the last 20 years that I've got so mad that I punched the wall, when she chewed through the fiber the second time. So now I lose my shit over losing, you know, internet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Oh.
I'm not going to be the guy with the AK-47 defending, you know, the last tin of sardines in my house. No, you guys can have that if it
No,
comes
me
down.
either. Me either.
Okay, so I'm
I'm
gonna need
nervous
your
about hiking.
addresses to get my sardines. Ken goes.
So yeah, tell us about some of the real doomsday scenarios we should be concerned about, Dr. Ben.
I do have a slide for that. Let's see, we could pull that up just so I don't have to think about it.
Yeah, sure.
Go back to my virtual screen here. If we go to the end, I did want to make the point at the end of my talk that, some of this stuff could really happen.
Mm.
Nuclear war is still a problem. Near-Earth asteroids are still a problem. Leaving to that meteor, global warming is still of a problem. And now, of course, the thing everybody's concerned about is the damned AI that's going to kill us all. That's part of living in a modern society, is whether it's nuclear weapons or AI or something in between that I can't think of at the moment. If we start acting stupidly enough, there's always something that could take us out. Absolutely. So there are real threats, right? Now, Jesus coming down on his white stallion to take on the devil and the plains of, Armageddon or whatever the fuck they call that ain't happening, right? But we could certainly kill ourselves. The virus, the wrong virus gets loose. I mean, COVID was just a tiny taste of that, right?
Yeah.
The wrong virus gets loose. Something I just recently heard, and it scared me and made me mad all at the same time, is that we've wiped out anthrax. But there's more to that story, at least based on, this thing that I've heard on this podcast, that that whole wiping out of anthrax was actually spearheaded by the Soviets. And we, anytime we suggested something, the United States or the West in general suggested something, the Soviets would say, that's a horrible idea, we're not doing it. But the Soviets were saying, we want to wipe out anthrax. So, of course, we in the West said, yeah, that's a great idea. And we were supportive of it. And so, lo and behold, we all worked together and we wiped out anthrax. I mean, it doesn't exist as a disease on the face of the planet anymore.
Anthrax or smallpox?
Smallpox. Thank you.
Okay, because I think anthrax
Smallpox.
is still occasional.
Smallpox. Right. I stand corrected. The problem was, is they found out after the collapse of the Soviet Union that the whole point in the Soviet Union was doing it was they had saved all of these biological weapons with smallpox in them, and they were trying to make a population on the earth where only the Russian people were vaccinated, and if they wanted to kill off everybody else on the planet with their biological doomsday device, they were set up to do it. So they had very cynical reasons for even doing that.
Oh my goodness.
Which, of course, we all got pissed off when we found out about that. But, it's so that kind of thing could still happen, especially in conjunction with AI, bad actors, our friends in Russia and Iran and China. It's pretty clear if you just watch the news that they seem to be hell bent on just sending as much badness to the world as they possibly can for only reasons that they can understand. I personally don't care what the Russians do, if they want to be happy and live their lives and not hurt anybody. But there are people on this planet that clearly don't have that same philosophy. They want to be in charge of everything, and if they're not in charge of everything, they'll burn down the whole world.
Yeah.
I don't know what we do with people like that. But again, the biggest threat is us. It's like, I don't lose the first minute of sleep over AI.
I don't either.
Me
For the
either.
record, I love
the
AI.
near-Earth asteroids, I think at this point, we're quickly getting to a point where, we'll see it coming and we'll be able to do something about it. We still haven't mapped every one of them.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet, but in 2 decades, we will, I think we really will be comfortably there.
Yeah, but if it's 100 million year window, right, and we're 65 million years in since the last one,
Yeah.
What's interesting is we
Odds
get
are good. We're going to be able to detect it and do something about it before there's one that ever shows up to be a real threat.
What's interesting
we'll
is that if you save the near Earth asteroids, nuclear war, global warming, and now the AI, we get a cocktail of these things going. It's not a or proposition necessarily.
Yeah, I mean Terminator.
Yeah, and the
Terminator
thing
was nuclear war and AI and maybe also biological war and the like lore of how it actually worked out. I don't know.
get a perfect storm going. Yeah, I mean the perfect storm scenario is a little harder to think would wipe out the whole planet.
Yeah,
Because with 8 billion people, there's probably going to be some pocket that has a resistance to this bug and didn't get hit by the nuke, and the AI is not aware of them.
Yeah,
Or they actually live in some remote village and don't have internet or whatever. So it gets a little harder if it's not, one all-encompassing event, but that could happen under the right conditions, I'm sure.
The thing that's interesting about the AI too is that's the one that's like we said, none of us lose sleep over it, and so it's the one that if it becomes a threat, it's because it makes our lives so much better, and we just let it take over more. And because every time somebody gets worried about an advance in AI, they just describe a bunch of features and a bunch of things I needed to do like yesterday, and I'm like, oh, I'm definitely signing up for that new ChatGPT. Oh, definitely.
Yes. I use it all the time. It's so helpful.
So it's the only one I'm going, here, take my money, please.
Well, and I've been doing, because I was a controls engineer and a programmer, I've been doing panels on the whole AI threat ever since I started going to cons for 12 years, right? And the last slide, right before the thank you slide, is a picture of me on the couch with the dogs. And the point is this: we have bred certain things the way we want them to be in the past. And we actually don't give ourselves enough credit sometimes. Usually when it's a concerted effort to make something like a pet, a class of animals that are there to help us, we usually do tend to breed them to be benevolent. I mean, yes, there are always exceptions, but the vast majority of them are just there to serve us and to be happy and to make us happy. Because really, most of us, I think, really do like peace and love and all that happy. There's always somebody that wants to be Genghis Khan and take over the world through bloodshed, but most of us are more than happy to just sit on the couch and pet our dogs and be happy, right? So I think this concern that some bad actor is going to make this AI that's going to just kill us all, I think it might be a little overblown. It's always possible. Anything's possible. But I don't really see that happening. I mean, we've been down this road before with our domesticated animals, and it didn't happen then. It's probably not going to happen with the AI either.
I actually think that's a really fantastic point, and I think that I'll definitely actually use that when I hear people's fears of AI come up in the future to sort of think about domestication in that way.
I will say that we're not there, that we don't have any plans to put domesticated animals like in charge of infrastructure. Eventually, we're going to start
Speak
putting
for yourself. Some of these cat people, I mean.
Yeah. But my laptop doesn't sleep with me either. My laptop doesn't sleep beside me in the bed, could rip my throat out in the middle of the night if it decided to, right? So yeah, it's different, but it's also kind of not different, I think.
Well, it's also it for an AI would have to wait. It would have to be deceptive and wait a long time before it would be in the position to actually do what people are scared of it doing.
Yeah.
And if it's a genuine general artificial intelligence, it's probably just not going to have the self-control. So, it's going to tip its hand. It's the first of its kind. It's yeah. We can just turn the power plant off.
We will have to Christy Nome it. That's what we'll call it. We'll have to, we'll have to Christy
You know,
Nolan when it gets to that point.
well, and exactly, you have other AIs that will be more benevolent if you've got a really malevolent one. You'll have other AIs that step up and say, "No, you can't do that. I'm not going to let you do that. I see what you're doing. Stop it." And
Like
they
the
probably
Oracle,
will
the
be the
Matrix.
majority. You know,
Yeah,
and so
we'll
the
make AI
scenario,
to read the other AI's programming and all this type of stuff.
well, or at least read the intentions, just like you read the intentions of another human being. You know,
Yeah. Mm.
it's pretty clear that we all know what Putin's doing. We don't know, we don't always know why, because it's like, what are you going to be, the king of the dirt pile? You know, when this is all said and done. But it's like, no, there'll be other AI that'll go, I see what you did there, I see where you're going with it, and stop it, or I'm going to have to step up. So
All right.
the bigger thing would be, you know, the whole nanny thing where, you know, we're all just coddled by the AI and we all get to where we're not effective or have any impact in the world anymore because we just let the AI do everything.
Yeah,
Kind of feel like society's done that for most of us anyway.
I,
Before
I
I'm okay
AI.
with it.
I feel like in that regard, it's important to link with to think about what our political and social goals are. Not to inject any, but literally to think about that, because I think if it goes a certain way, it should be liberating, right? It should bring about this automation and it shouldn't feel like I'm so worried about the AI taking my job. It should feel like I'm so excited there's going to be AI to make my job easier, but I also have to be secure that
Yeah,
the organization I work for isn't trying to actually put me out of a job. You know, like that's part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're gonna wrap up. Do you guys have any? I always like to give people the opportunity if they want to have any last closing thoughts or things they want to mention on the topic, so it doesn't just cut off on them out of nowhere.
Have some sort of
Armageddon.
closure.
Yeah, some sort of closure. There you go.
The
What
do you
Core is
think?
my favorite Armageddon movie.
Well, wait, say that. What is it? That's a
The
good
Core is
one.
my favorite.
The Core is your
Armageddon.
favorite Armageddon movie. That's a good one.
Yeah.
All right, Ben, what's your favorite Armageddon movie?
The Core, dude.
Yeah, I
Really?
love it. I love The Core. It's so much fun.
Apparently a controversial selection. Is that no good? That's weak sauce. You know.
It's
It's
so
a
bad.
steaming pile of horseshit. Do you just like it because it's such a steaming pile of horseshit? Is that why it's fun for you? You can just laugh at it?
Yes. Like yes. What? I don't. Yeah. It's the best bad science movie ever.
Okay, I'll give you that. I mean, if you can just suspend all disbelief and
I can't.
I mean,
I'm screaming at it the whole time.
well, exactly. And see, that's the problem is I cannot completely suspend disbelief like that. You know, I actually, the Liv Tyler one works for me just because Liv Tyler's in it, you know,
Yeah,
just
yeah, I like
listen
that
to
one too. Hey, easy on the eyes, easy on the mind. All right. Well, look, y'all. I first I'm going to send a special shout out to Sunny Shell, who will be returning as your normal host. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to sit in. Of course, the Skeptic Haven channel is monetized, which means that you can send super chats or super thanks later. And I'm sure we'll get back to you if you leave them in the comment section. Don't forget to check out the other shows on Skeptic Haven. Tuesdays is Secular Soapbox. Thursday is the Sunny Spot. Saturday is the Global Atheist and Women Atheist Unload. And on Sunday, there's Let's Talk. And of course, an extra special thanks to the Patreons, Helen Greene, Logan Fisher, Amanda McLeod, Eric Ozols, Rion, Dean and Murphy, Dan D, Michael Wiseman, Cindy Plaza, Sunny Shell, Aaron Colson, and Phil Calderone. I'm Jay, Pocket Locker 86. Thank you so much to Dr. Tapioca Weasel and Dr. Ben for joining me. We'll see you next time. Take care, gang.
Bye-bye.
Our being knows this is where we came from. We long to return. And we can. Because the cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos
to know itself.
If